Deep within the Appalachian Mountains, where West Virginia stretches its arms towards New York City, a furious storm lashed in Stonehaven Valley. The sky, once studded with stars, now roared like a wounded beast. Lightning cut through the pitch-black night, while the wind howled through ancient pine trees. It was one of those storms the old-timers called a soul storm, when nature seemed to want to cleanse not just the land, but also the spirits. Amidst that apocalyptic scene, a tiny light stubbornly persisted. In a rustic stone and wood cabin, hidden among araucaria trees, Joaquin, a boy of just 10 years old, held a flame between his trembling hands. His tanned face, illuminated by the fire, revealed deep eyes that seemed to carry the wisdom of someone much older. "It won't go out. It won't go out," the boy murmured, like a prayer repeated endlessly. "Mom used to say that as long as the fire is lit, hope never dies." The cabin, the last memory of his family, was simple but welcoming. The rustic wooden walls were adorned with objects that told stories, a rosary hanging beside an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, old tools that had belonged to his grandfather, and a small altar where he kept a yellowed photograph of his mother, Luciana, who had passed away 6 months ago after a long illness. Since then, Joaquin had lived alone, surviving on what he had learned in his few years of life. He fished in the nearby river, gathered fruits, and cultivated a small garden behind the cabin. The residents of the nearest village, about 3 miles away, respected his space. From time to time, Mrs. Zulmira, the retired teacher, brought groceries and checked if everything was all right. But on that stormy night, Joaquin was completely alone, with only the company of the flame and his memories. "Light guides the lost," his mother used to say. "Never let the fire go out, my son. It's our connection to those who have left and those who are yet to come." A particularly strong clap of thunder made the cabin tremble. Joaquin huddled, shielding the flame with even greater determination. That's when he heard it, amidst the deafening sound of the rain and the howl of the wind, a faint knock on the door, so faint it could have just been a fallen branch. But the boy had ears trained by the silence of solitude. Hesitantly, he approached the door, the lantern firmly held in his small hands, calloused by daily work. He opened it just a crack, enough for a violent gust of wind and rain to invade the cabin, almost extinguishing his precious flame. Outside, a tall man lay on his knees, drenched and trembling. His clothes, though dirty and torn, betrayed an expensive origin. A fine fabric shirt now plastered to his body, mud-stained tailored trousers, and on his wrist, a gold watch that gleamed discreetly despite the grime. "Help," the man murmured before collapsing forward. Without hesitation, Joaquin placed the lantern on the table and used all his strength to drag the stranger inside. Despite his small size, the boy managed to close the door and pull the man closer to the fire crackling in the makeshift fireplace. "Easy, sir. You're safe now. The storm won't get you in here." The stranger trembled violently, alternating between moments of consciousness and delirium. Joaquin ran to fetch the few blankets he possessed and began to remove the man's soaked clothes. A nasty wound on his right leg caught his attention, a deep cut that was still bleeding lightly. "That's a bad one," the boy murmured, running to a small chest from which he took dried herbs, bottles of tinctures, and clean bandages. With the skill of someone who had cared for his mother during a long illness, he began to clean and treat the wound. The stranger appeared to be around 45 years old. His face was well shaven despite the situation, with graying hair at the temples and hands without calluses, a sign that he was not accustomed to manual labor. While tending to the man, Joaquin noticed a gold chain around his neck, with half of a medallion. "You must be an important person from the big city," the boy said, even though he knew the man probably wasn't listening. "But up here in the mountains, everyone is equal. Everyone needs warmth, food, and a light in the dark." After cleaning the wound and applying a makeshift dressing, Joaquin covered the man with blankets and put water on to boil. The stranger mumbled disconnected words in his feverish state. "Pedro, the helicopter. Chin. Beatrice. Forgive me." Joaquin didn't understand the meaning of those words, but he continued his task with dedication. He prepared an herbal tea his mother had taught him to make to lower fever, and carefully managed to make the man drink a few sips. The storm outside showed no signs of abating any time soon. Lightning illuminated the cabin through the window cracks, casting dancing shadows on the rustic walls. Joaquin fed the fire, throwing in a few more pieces of firewood he kept carefully stacked in a corner. "You arrived at the right time," he told the unconscious man, "because whoever needs light always finds my fire. My mother taught me, we never deny warmth to someone who's cold. We never deny help to someone in need." The boy sat on the packed dirt floor beside the stranger. He would keep watch during the night, ensuring the fever didn't worsen and the fire remained lit. Gradually, the man's breathing normalized, but he remained unconscious. Joaquin looked at his mother's photo on the small altar. "You were right, Mom. Lost people always find our fire, don't they?" A distant thunder seemed to answer his question. The boy settled in better, preparing for the long night. Outside, the storm continued its furious spectacle, but inside the cabin, the small flame of hope remained lit, like a beacon in the midst of chaos. What Joaquin didn't know was that this stranger, fallen before him, would forever change the course of his life, and that the story beginning there on a stormy night in the Appalachian Mountains would intertwine destinies in a way that not even the wisest of elders could predict. The first rays of sun timidly penetrated through the window cracks when the man finally opened his eyes. Confused, he looked around, trying to understand where he was. The rustic cabin, with its packed dirt floor and wooden walls, bore no resemblance to the luxurious environments he was accustomed to. He felt a pang of pain in his leg and vaguely remembered the fall, the rain, the despair. "You're awake." The childish voice startled him. Joaquin approached with a cup of herbal tea in his small hands. His dark eyes sparkled with a mix of curiosity and concern. Where am I?" the man asked, his voice hoarse. "In my house in the Appalachian Mountains. You arrived last night, all hurt. I'm Joaquin." The man tried to sit up, but the pain prevented him. He leaned back again into the makeshift blankets. "My name is Rodrigo Menezes. I had an accident." "Drink this, Mr. Rodrigo. It's herbal tea my mother taught me. It will help with the pain and fever." Rodrigo accepted the tea, observing the boy with curiosity. Something about that child deeply unsettled him, as if looking at Joaquin was like staring into a distorted mirror of his own past. "Do you live here alone?" he asked after a few sips of the bitter tea. Joaquin averted his gaze for a moment, turning his attention to the fire that continued to burn in the small fireplace. "Since my mother left 6 months ago. But I'm not really alone. I have the fire to keep me company." The boy spoke of the fire as if it were a living entity, a friend he conversed with during long nights of solitude. Rodrigo noticed there was something special about that relationship, something almost sacred to the boy. "And your father?" "I never knew him. Mom said he left before I was born, that he was a man from the big city, full of dreams too big to fit in these mountains." Rodrigo felt a knot in his throat. The story sounded painfully familiar. In another time, in another life, he too had been a big city man with grand dreams, who had abandoned what truly mattered. "I need to contact my company. They must be looking for me. The helicopter." "There's no phone here," Joaquin interrupted. "The nearest village is about 3 miles away, but with that injured leg you won't be able to get there now. When Mrs. Zulmira comes to visit me, she can notify someone." Rodrigo ran a hand over his face, feeling the stubble. The watch on his wrist showed 3 o'clock, but he didn't know if it was afternoon or morning. He was completely disconnected from his world of meetings, commitments, and tight deadlines. "What happened to you?" Joaquin asked as he poked the fire. "How did you end up here?" Rodrigo closed his eyes, trying to organize his fragmented thoughts. The last 48 hours were a confused blur in his mind. "I was returning from a meeting in a company helicopter. There was a storm, very strong. The pilot tried to divert, but—" He paused, taking a deep breath. "I don't remember the impact. Only waking up somewhere in the forest, alone. I walked for hours, maybe days. Then I saw your light from afar." "The fire guides the lost," Joaquin said simply, repeating his mother's words. "That's what brought you here." The morning slowly advanced. Rodrigo watched the boy in his daily tasks, feeding the chickens in the small enclosure behind the cabin, gathering some vegetables from the garden, fixing a leak in the roof. There was a dignity in Joaquin's work, a seriousness that seemed incompatible with his age. "Shouldn't you be in school?" Rodrigo asked when the boy returned to check his dressing. "I only go twice a week now. Tuesday and Thursday. Mrs. Zulmira, who was a teacher, teaches me the rest. She says I'm a diligent student." As Joaquin changed the dressing on his leg, Rodrigo noticed the boy's hands, small but calloused by constant work. Hands that shouldn't know so much effort so early. Something inside him contracted an old and familiar guilt. "You're an extraordinary boy." "Joaquin," the boy smiled shyly, unaccustomed to compliments. "I just do what needs to be done, Mr. Rodrigo. Mom used to say we don't need to be big to do good. We just need to have a big heart." The day passed slowly. Rodrigo slept several times, still exhausted by the trauma of the accident and the strenuous walk through the forest. In his restless dreams, faces from the past tormented him. Beatrice, his ex-wife, looking at him with disappointment. Pedro, his young son, extending his arms in a silent plea. His father, severe and distant, repeating that professional success was the only measure of a man. When he woke again, it was already night. The cabin was illuminated only by the fire in the fireplace and by two strategically placed lanterns. Joaquin was preparing something that smelled surprisingly good, considering the circumstances. "I made vegetable soup from the garden with a little dried meat I was saving for special occasions," the boy explained. "You need strength to get better." Rodrigo accepted the steaming bowl of soup, surprised by its comforting flavor. As they ate in silence, a new sound caught his attention. Knocks on the door, firmer than his had been the previous night. Joaquin exchanged a look with Rodrigo and got up, picking up the lantern. "Who could that be at this hour?" he murmured, cautiously approaching the door. As he opened it, a gust of cold wind entered, bringing with it a stooped figure. A woman in her 60s, grey hair tied in a messy bun, simple but clean clothes, and eyes that carried a deep sadness. "Help," she whispered, her voice weak. "I got lost on the trail when the fog came down. I've been walking for hours." Joaquin immediately guided her inside, offering her a place near the fire. The woman trembled, more from exhaustion than from cold. "You're safe now. I'm Joaquin Nice, and this is Mr. Can Rodrigo. He also arrived lost last night," the woman observed. Rodrigo, with shrewd eyes, quickly assessing the situation. There was a sharp intelligence in her that the years had not diminished. "I'm Irachema Ferreira. I was visiting my husband's grave in the Pine Ridge Village and Cemetery. I didn't notice the time passing, and when the fog came down, I lost the way back." Joaquin immediately served a bowl of soup to the newcomer and offered her hot tea. Irachema accepted with a silent thank you, her eyes scanning every detail of the simple cabin. "Do you live here alone, boy?" "Yes, ma'am." "Since my mother left," Irachema frowned, a shadow of disapproval crossing her wrinkled face. "And the authorities allow this? A child alone in this godforsaken place?" Rodrigo Torchi noticed Joaquina's discomfort and intervened. "Joaquina manages very well, and the neighbors visit him regularly." Irachema studied Rodrigo with renewed interest. "And you, sir? What are you doing here in those clothes that obviously don't belong in these mountains?" "I had a helicopter accident. Joaquin found me and saved my life." The woman nodded slowly, blowing on the hot tea before taking a sip. There was something in her posture that suggested a life of discipline and order, now interrupted by circumstances beyond her control. "So here we are, the three of us thrown by fate into this cabin, in the middle of nowhere." The fire crackled in the fireplace as if in agreement. Joaquin fed the flames with another piece of wood, murmuring words that sounded like an ancient prayer. "It's not by chance," the boy finally said. "The fire calls to those who need warmth." Irachema and Rodrigo exchanged an intrigued look. There was an ancestral wisdom in the simple words of that boy, something that transcended formal education and touched upon deeper truths. The night slowly advanced. Outside the cabin, dense fog enveloped the mountains, further isolating that small refuge from the rest of the world. Inside, three strangers united by chance, or was it destiny, began to realize that perhaps their lives were intertwined in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. While Joaquin prepared places for everyone to sleep, Irachima observed Rodrigo with curiosity. "You don't seem like an ordinary businessman to me, sir. There's something in your eyes. A loss?" Rodrigo looked away, uncomfortable with the accuracy of that observation. "We all lose something throughout life, don't we?" Irachema smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, indeed. Some of us more than we should." 3 days had passed since Irachima's arrival. The persistent fog in the mountains made her departure impossible, just as it prevented Rodrigo from seeking help in the village. An unlikely coexistence began to establish itself in that isolated cabin: a successful businessman, a bitter old woman, and a boy who seemed to carry ancient wisdom in his childlike eyes. The daily routine had its own rhythm. Joaquin woke before sunrise to tend to the animals in the garden. Irachima naturally took over the household chores, cooking with the simple ingredients they had available and organizing the cabin's limited space. Rodrigo, still incapacitated by his injured leg, felt useless for the first time in many years. "I'm not used to sitting still," he confessed to Irachima, and as he watched her prepare lunch. "My whole life has been built around always being busy, always producing." The old woman smiled discreetly, stirring the broth simmering over the fire. "You're like most city people. You confuse movement with purpose. Sometimes it's in silence and pause that we find the most important answers." Rodrigo shifted uncomfortably on the makeshift bench. The woman's words echoed disturbingly in his mind. "What answers did you find in silence, Mrs. Irachima?" She paused her chores for a moment, her eyes gaining a distance that went beyond the cabin walls. "That life doesn't wait for our plans. That lost time doesn't come back. That certain wounds never heal completely." She returned to stirring the broth, adding, "But I also learned that there's always a chance to start over, even when it seems impossible." Outside, the Joaquin was chopping wood. The rhythmic sound of the axe against the wood punctuated the conversation like a constant metronome. "The boy is impressive," Rodrigo commented, changing the subject. "So young and already so resilient." "Children are naturally resilient when they need to be," Irachima replied. "But they shouldn't have to be. A boy his age should be playing, studying, being cared for, not taking care of a house alone." Rodrigo felt the implicit judgment in her words, as if somehow he was responsible for Joaquin's situation. "He reminds me of my son," he confessed suddenly, surprising himself with the revelation. Taya Pedro Kiki would be about his age now. Irachima turned, interest evident in her gaze. "Would be?" Rodrigo took a deep breath, unconsciously touching the chain with half a medallion he wore around his neck. "I lost contact with him and my ex-wife 5 years ago, after an incident. I don't know where they are, or even if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The possibility was too painful to articulate aloud. Irachima's approached, sitting at the rustic table facing him. "Tell me, if you wish." Sometimes talking eases the burden, and Rodrigo spoke. For the first time in years, the words flowed without the carefully constructed barriers that kept his emotions in check. He told about his Beatrice, his great love from youth whom he had met in business school, about their hasty marriage when she became pregnant, the initial difficulties of Pedro's birth. "I was too ambitious. I worked day and night to build my company. I was rarely home, missed birthdays, school recitals. I told myself it was for their good, to ensure a comfortable future for my family." Irachima listened in silence, her eyes revealing that she knew that story well. "Beatrice had endured for years, always hoping I would change, that I would realize what truly mattered. Pedro grew up seeing me as a stranger who occasionally appeared at home. And then," his voice faltered. That part of the story was still difficult to articulate. "Then the accident happened," he finally managed to say. "We were returning from a rare family trip. I was driving, arguing on the phone about an important business deal. I didn't see the curve." Rodrigo closed his eyes, reliving that moment in slow motion. The car went off the road, rolled several times. "When I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, there was no one by my side. A nurse told me that Mama Beatrice and Han Pedro had been discharged, but they never came back to see me. They disappeared." Irachema frowned, confused. "They just left? Without explanation?" "I searched everywhere. I hired private detectives, nothing. As if they had evaporated." I only found this. Rodrigo showed the half medallion he carried. It was a gift I gave for Pedro on his last birthday. A medallion that splits in two, half with him, half with me. I found his part among the belongings recovered from the accident. I imagine he lost it during the rollover. A heavy silence fell in the cabin, broken only by the sound of wood crackling in the fire and Joaquina's axe outside. 5 years passed. I plunged even deeper into work, built a corporate empire, became the man I always wanted to be. But at what cost? Rodrigo's voice was choked with emotion. I would give everything, every penny, every achievement, to have my family back. To have a second chance. Iracema extended her wrinkled hand, lightly touching Rodrigo's arm. Perhaps you are here for a reason. Perhaps this is your second chance. Just not in the way you imagined. The sound of the door opening interrupted the conversation. Joaquin entered, carrying a pile of firewood. His face was flushed from the effort and the cold outside, but his eyes shone with the same calm intensity as always. The fog is lifting, he announced, placing the firewood beside the fireplace. I could see the valley down below. Tomorrow it should be clear for you to go, Mrs. Iracema. The woman nodded, returning her attention to the broth that was still simmering. The food is almost ready. Come wash your hands, Joaquin. As he watched the boy and the old woman move in harmony through the small kitchen, Rodrigo felt something strange, a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. There in that rustic cabin in the middle of the mountains, far from his corporate empire and all the comforts he was accustomed to, he felt more at home than in his penthouse apartment in New York City. Lunch was served, a nutritious broth accompanied by homemade bread that Iracema had baked that morning. They ate in comfortable silence when Joaquin finally spoke. You seemed sad talking with folky Mrs. Iracema. Were you talking about your family? Rodrigo exchanged a look with Iracema, surprised by the boy's perception. Yes, or Joaquin. I was talking about my son and his mother. Are they no longer with you? The direct question, without circumlocution, was typical of childlike sincerity. Rodrigo hesitated, but answered with equal honesty. No, we lost contact many years ago, after an accident. Joaquin nodded, as if that made perfect sense. That's why you have so much sadness in your eyes, just like Mrs. Iracema. The old woman raised her eyebrows, surprised to be included in the observation. And me? Joaquin? What do you see in my eyes? The boy considered the question with the seriousness of an ancient philosopher. You carry a great weight, something you can't forgive. Perhaps yourself. Iracema is visibly paled. Her hands trembled slightly, spilling a few drops of broth. How do you know that? Joaquin shrugged with the simplicity of someone merely stating the obvious. The fire shows people's truth. My mother taught me to see. A heavy silence fell over the table. Rodrigo and Iracema exchanged intrigued glances, both disturbed by the precision of the boy's observations. And what does the fire show about you, Joaquin? Rodrigo finally asked. That I need to keep the flame alive, that I still have a mission to fulfill. He smiled, a surprisingly mature smile. Just like you and Mrs. Iracema, we haven't finished what we came to do in this life yet. In the afternoon, while Joaquin taught Rodrigo to mend a fishing net, Iracema sat on the cabin's small porch. Her gaze, lost in the mountains, seemed to seek answers on distant horizons. Rodrigo, noticing her isolation, left the boy with the net and approached her, leaning on a makeshift cane. Joaquin had touched on something painful for you, didn't he? Iracema didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was laden with emotions suppressed for decades. I have a daughter. We haven't spoken in 23 years. Rodrigo sat beside her, respecting the time she needed to continue. I was a different woman back then, rigid, inflexible, obsessed with appearances and what others would think. When she got pregnant, unmarried at 19, Iracema closed her eyes, the pain of the memory still vivid. I threw her out of the house, said terrible, unforgivable things. A solitary tear ran down her wrinkled face. My husband tried to reconcile us, but I remained unyielding. Damned pride! When I finally realized my mistake, it was too late. She had disappeared, moved to another city. I tried to find her for years, without success. Rodrigo felt a deep connection to that story, so similar to his own. Is that why you were at the cemetery when you got lost? Visiting your husband's grave? Yes, he never lost hope of finding her. On his deathbed, he made me promise I would keep looking, that I wouldn't give up until I found our daughter and met our grandchild. From inside the cabin, Hugh, Joaquin's voice called them for afternoon tea. As they walked back, Iracema was held Rodrigo's arm. Perhaps the boy is right. Perhaps we are here for a greater purpose that we don't yet understand. Perhaps this is the chance we have both been seeking for so long. Rodrigo nodded, feeling a chill that didn't come from the mountain cold. Whatever it is, Manai. Mrs. Iracema. I feel we are closer to finding out. The fire in the fireplace crackled, as if silently agreeing. Dawn brought with it a clear sky after days of persistent fog. The Appalachian Mountains revealed themselves majestically in the distance, covered by lush vegetation that seemed to breathe under the morning sun. For Iracema, it was a sign that she should leave. I need to go back to the village, she said, as she packed her few belongings. I've abused your hospitality enough. Joaquin, who was tending the fire for breakfast, turned with a worried expression. Can't you stay a little longer? The weather is changing again. Rodrigo, who could now walk with the aid of the makeshift cane, approached the small window. The sky, intensely blue on the horizon, began to show dark clouds gathering to the north. The boy might be right, Mrs. Iracema. These mountains are unpredictable. Perhaps it's better to wait another day. The old woman hesitated, torn between the need to resume her search and the warning from the two. Her gaze met the fire crackling in the center of the cabin, that flame that Joaquin kept lit with such dedication. Perhaps you're right, Joaquin. One more day won't make a difference after so many years. The boy smiled, satisfied, and returned to stirring the coffee he was preparing over the embers. There was something in the way he had looked at the sky, an almost supernatural certainty that made Iracema put her small bundle back in the corner of the cabin. The morning passed peacefully. Rodrigo, frustrated with his limited mobility, asked Joaquino to teach him to carve wood. The businessman, accustomed to dealing with spreadsheets and contracts, discovered an unexpected satisfaction in creating something with his own hands, even if it was just a rustic spoon. It's strange, he commented to Iracema as he worked on the piece of wood. I spent decades building an empire, but I had never created anything so tangible. The old woman smiled, her hands busy with a small loom she had found in a corner of the cabin. The things that truly matter are usually those we can touch, aren't they? A hug, an outstretched hand, an object made with care. Around noon, the change in weather became evident. The wind picked up, bringing with it the characteristic smell of imminent rain. Dark clouds already dominated much of the sky, advancing rapidly towards the valley. It's going to be a strong storm now, Joaquin said, looking worriedly at the sky as he collected eggs from the small chicken coop. Just like the one the night you arrived, Mr. Rodrigo. The boy ran to reinforce the cabin's windows and door, checked the firewood supply, and filled buckets with clean water from the well. There was an impressive efficiency in his movements, as if he followed an established protocol for such occasions. It's not the first time you've faced a storm like this alone, is it? Rodrigo asked, observing the boy's preparations. I've been through 3 big ones since my mother left, Joaquin replied, without interrupting his work. You learn to prepare. The first thunder echoed in the distance, reverberating among the mountains like the roar of an ancient beast. Iracema involuntarily shivered, her gaze meeting Rodrigo in Seus. Both felt the same, a restlessness that went beyond the natural fear of the approaching storm. By 3 in the afternoon, darkness was almost complete. The rain poured down violently, lashing the cabin walls and turning the yard into a muddy mess. Lightning illuminated the interior of the refuge in ghostly flashes, casting dancing shadows on the rustic walls. Will the fire hold? Iracema asked, visibly nervous about the storm's intensity. It always does, Joaquin replied with surprising conviction. Kneeling before the fireplace, he carefully added wood, murmuring words that sounded like an ancient prayer. Mom used to say that as long as there's faith and dry wood, the fire never dies. Afternoon gave way to night without any sign that the storm would diminish. They had dinner by the light of the fire and lanterns. a simple soup and bread, sharing stories to ward off the fear that nature's fury naturally evoked. My company started in a garage, Rodrigo has recounted, trying to distract Irasima, who flinched at every louder clap of thunder. It was just me and 2 college friends, with more dreams than capital. Today, Menese's technology employs over 3,000 people. And was it worth it? Irachima asked, her hands busy with embroidery. Or the coup? Sacrifice? Sanstimo Rodrigo looked at the flame dancing in the fireplace, seeking the answer in that fire which, according to Joaquin, revealed truths. I thought so, for a long time. Now, I'm not so sure. A particularly loud crash shook the cabin, making everyone jump. It wasn't ordinary thunder. It sounded like something heavy falling or breaking. The embankment! Teo Joaquin exclaimed, jumping to his feet. It must have given way with all this rain. The boy ran to the window, trying to see something in the absolute darkness, illuminated only by occasional lightning. One flash revealed for an instant the devastation. Part of the nearby slope had collapsed, carrying trees and rocks downhill. Thank goodness the cabin is on high ground, Irasima murmured, making the sign of the cross. They were commenting on the landslide when they heard desperate knocks on the door, almost inaudible amidst the storm's roar. Joaquin ran to open it, while Tuasa, Rodrigo stood up, leaning on his makeshift cane. A woman entered, completely drenched, desperation etched on her young face. Her black hair dripped plastered to her pale face, and her dark eyes were wide with terror. "Please help," she cried as soon as she caught her breath. "My son, my tuotego, he's gone. He was playing near the house when the storm started, and now... Violent sobs prevented her from continuing. Irasima immediately enveloped her in a hug, guiding her near the fire while Joaquin ran to fetch a towel and hot tea. "Calm down, my dear," Irasima said, her voice firm like someone accustomed to crisis situations. "Take a deep breath and tell us what happened calmly." The woman breathed deeply, accepting the mug of tea. Joaquin offered her with trembling hands. "My name is Beatrice. Beatrice Campos. I live in a small house near the creek, about 1.5 miles from here. My son, Tiago, 10 years old, was playing in the yard while I finished dinner. When the heavy rain started, I called for him, but he didn't answer." Rodrigo paled upon hearing the woman's name, but remained silent, observing her with disturbing intensity. There was something familiar about that face, even disfigured by panic. "I searched everywhere," Beatrice continued, her voice choked. "I called the neighbors. We searched with flashlights, but the storm worsened, and then we saw that part of the embankment near the creek had given way. Tiago likes to play there, building dams with stones and sticks." Her body was shaken by another fit of sobs. Irachima squeezed her hands between hers, conveying strength. "We kept searching, even with the danger. Then we split up to get more help. I saw the light of this cabin and—" "We'll find him," Joaquin interrupted with a determination that surprised everyone. The boy was already wearing a rustic raincoat and filling a bag with ropes, a small shovel and extra lanterns. "The fire doesn't let anyone get lost in the dark." Beatrice had looked at the boy with renewed hope in her eyes. Do you think he's still—" "Alive," Joaquin finished firmly. "He's alive and we'll find him." Rodrigo stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. "I'll go with you." "Joaquin, your leg isn't good yet." "Mr. Rodrigo," the boy protested. "You could worsen the injury." "It doesn't matter. I won't stay here while a boy is lost in this storm." There was such intense emotion in Rodrigo's voice that no one dared to contradict him. Arachema quickly helped him put on a makeshift cloak while Joaquin prepared 2 more lanterns. "I'll stay here with the Beatrice," the old woman said. "I'll keep the fire strong to guide you back." The young mother stood up, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "No, I'm going too. He's my son, Beatrice." Rodrigo's voice sounded strangely intimate as he pronounced that name. "Your strength will be more useful if you stay here, keeping hope alive. If Tiago Puera manages to find his way back alone, someone needs to be here to receive him." Something in the way he spoke, perhaps the natural authority, perhaps the genuine concern, made Beatrice's nod. Reluctantly, "Bring my son back, please." Joaquin opened the door, facing the curtain of rain that lashed fiercely. "Follow me! I know every inch of these mountains!" Rodrigo followed the boy into the storm, feeling the icy rain immediately penetrate beneath his improvised cloak. The wind howled through the trees, bending them like twigs. The trail had turned into a muddy stream flowing down towards the valley. "We need to get to the embankment before the situation worsens," Joaquin shouted, his voice almost inaudible amidst the storm's roar. The walk was extremely difficult. Rodrigo struggled to maintain his balance on his injured leg, constantly slipping on the muddy terrain. With each step, he felt excruciating pain. But the mental image of a boy lost in the darkness, so similar to the son he had lost, gave him the strength to continue. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached the edge of the embankment. The scene, illuminated by frequent lightning, was desolate. A large part of the slope had collapsed, creating a scar on the earth that descended to the creek, now transformed into a furious torrent. "Tiago."
"Tiago?"
Joaquin shouted, his childish voice trying to overcome the storm's roar. Rodrigo joined the calls, scanning the area with the lantern that could barely illuminate a few feet ahead. The rain continued relentless, drastically reducing visibility. That's when they heard it, faint, almost imperceptible, but definitely real. A child's cry. There. Joaquin pointed, running towards the edge of the landslide. Rodrigo followed him as fast as his injured leg allowed. Illuminating the spot with the lantern, they saw a scene that chilled both their blood. About 30 feet below, partially buried by mud and branches, was a boy. Only his face and one arm were visible. His expression was one of absolute terror. "Help me, please," he cried, his voice weakened by fear and effort. "Hold on, Tiago!" Joaquin replied, "We'll get you out of there." Looking around, the boy quickly assessed the situation. The slope was too steep to descend without proper equipment, and the ground remained unstable, threatening to give way more at any moment. "I need to go down to him," Joaquin said, already tying one of the ropes around his waist. "Mr. Rodrigo, you'll hold me." Rodrigo nodded, ignoring the pain in his leg. He found a tree still firmly rooted and tied the other end of the rope to the trunk, creating additional anchorage. "Be careful, Joaquin. If you feel the ground give way more, shout and I'll pull you back." The boy nodded, his expression a mix of fear and determination. With surprising skill, he began to descend the slippery slope, using exposed roots and stones for support. Rodrigo held the rope firmly, ignoring the protests of his aching muscles. The rain continued to lash, making every movement dangerous. The lantern's light flickered, threatening to go out at any moment. A lightning flash illuminated the entire scene, revealing how precarious the situation was. The creek below transformed into a violent current, roared like a hungry beast, ready to drag away anything, or anyone, that fell into its waters. Joaquin finally reached Tiago. The boy was trapped under a tangle of roots and branches, partially buried by mud. Carefully, the small rescuer began to dig around the trapped body, talking continuously to keep the other boy calm. "It's going to be okay, Tiago. Your mom is waiting in the cabin. The fire is lit to guide us back. Just a little more." Rodrigo watched from above, his heart tight with anxiety. Something about that scene. One boy rescuing another, the mother named Beatrice. The storm seemed like a distorted echo of his own past, a second chance that fate capriciously offered him. "I got him!" Joaquin finally shouted. "He's free! I'll tie the rope to him, Mr. Rodrigo." At that exact moment, a terrifying sound overlaid the storm's roar, the rumble of more earth giving way. The section where Joaquin was began to collapse. "Joaquin!" Rodrigo Cano shouted, pulling desperately on the rope. "Joaquin!" Rodrigo's scream tore through the stormy night as he pulled the rope with all the strength he could muster, ignoring the searing pain in his injured leg. The ground continued to give way, carrying with it rocks, trees, and mud. For a terrifying moment, Rodrigo lost sight of both boys in the darkness. The rope in his hands remained taut, but there was no way to know if it was still connected to anyone below. Joaquin.
Tiago?
He shouted again, his voice hoarse with despair. A lightning flash illuminated the scene, revealing an image that would forever be etched in Rodrigo's memory. Joaquin, precariously dangling from the side of the embankment, holding our Tiago with one arm, while the other clung to an exposed root. The rope was still tied around his waist, but it had loosened with the shifting earth. Without a second thought, Rodrigo tied his end of the rope to the tree trunk and began to descend, disregarding his own safety. Each step was a battle against pain and treacherous terrain, but a force greater than himself propelled him, the same force that kept Joaquin clinging to that root, refusing to let go of the other boy. "Hold on," Rodrigo shouted, sliding more than climbing down the muddy slope. "I'm coming!" To getting close to the boys, Rodrigo managed to position himself to relieve the weight on Joaquin. Carefully, he helped pull Tiago to a safer position. The boy was pale with fear, with scrapes on his body, but conscious. "The rope," Joaquin said, his voice trembling with exhaustion. "Tie him first." Rodrigo obeyed, securing the rope around Tiago's chest. He looked up, where the storm continued violently, making visibility difficult. "We'll need help to get up," he said, assessing the situation. As if in response to his words, voices emerged from the top of the embankment. Lanterns swayed in the darkness, and the sound of people calling echoed above the roar of the rain. "Here! We're down here!" Rodrigo shouted with all the strength of his lungs. The beams of light focused in their direction. Soon anxious faces appeared at the edge of the landslide. Men from the village, led by an older man with a grey beard. "Thank goodness," the man exclaimed. "Hold tight, we'll get you out of there." With an efficiency born of experience in previous rescues, the men threw down more ropes. In a few minutes, despite the continuing rain, they managed to hoist up Tiago first, then Joaquin, and finally Rodrigo. Lying in the mud at the top of the embankment, breathing heavily, Rodrigo looked at the stormy sky. For the first time in years, he felt a gratitude so intense it bordered on the sacred. Beside him, Joaquin also gasped, his small body exhausted by the superhuman effort he had made. "You're incredible, kid," Rodrigo murmured, reaching out to touch the boy's shoulder. "You saved his life." Joaquin smiled faintly, his mud-streaked face briefly illuminated by a flash of lightning. "The fire guided us." As always, the men helped them to their feet. Tiago, though scared and injured, seemed to be relatively well. The grey-bearded man, who introduced himself as Joan Sebastian, led the group back along the drenched path. "Mrs. Beatrice Hahn is desperate in the cabin," he explained, as they walked with difficulty along the muddy trail. "She and that older lady kept the fire lit like a beacon. That's how we managed to find our way to you." The walk back was slow and arduous, so as Rodrigo could barely bear weight on his injured leg, now worsened by the effort of the rescue. Joaquin, exhausted, was practically carried by one of the men. Tiago, despite his injuries, insisted on walking on his own, a determination in his eyes that resembled that of his rescuer. When they finally spotted the cabin's light shining in the darkness, Rodrigo felt an indescribable emotion. That small rustic building, with its eternally lit fire, had become more than a temporary refuge. It was a symbol of everything that truly mattered in life. The door opened even before they arrived. Beatrice ran out, completely ignoring the still falling rain. "Tiago, my son!" The boy broke free from the group and ran into his mother's arms. They both fell to their knees in the mud, embracing as if they would never let go. "Mommy, I was so scared." "It's okay now, my love. It's okay." Rodrigo, too, watched the scene from a distance, a strange sensation growing in his chest. There was something in that embrace, in those faces, that awakened deeply buried memories. The woman looked up, her eyes meeting Nice. Rodrigo's for a brief moment, a moment that seemed to freeze time. Slowly, with Tiago still in her arms, Beatrice stood up. Her face showed an expression of growing disbelief. "Rodrigo Ansai," she whispered, so softly it was almost unheard amidst the rain. "Rodrigo Menezes, Saidul." The world seemed to stop spinning. Rodrigo Town felt his whole body trembling, and it wasn't from cold or exhaustion. "Beatrice?" Irachemadis appeared at the cabin door, observing the scene with keen eyes. Something important was happening there, something that went beyond the dramatic rescue. "Please, everyone, come in," she called, momentarily breaking the spell of recognition. "The storm isn't over yet." The group entered the small cabin, which suddenly seemed even smaller with so many people. The fire in the fireplace crackled intensely, warming the room and illuminating the wet, tired faces. Joaquin immediately approached the flames, as if seeking strength from them. His eyes, however, did not stop observing Rodrigo and Beatrice, who remained at a certain distance from each other, as if fearing that any approach might make the other disappear. "It really is you," Beatrice Gamazon finally said, her voice a mixture of shock, joy, and apprehension. "After so long." "5 years," Rodrigo replied, his voice choked with emotion. 5 years looking for you." Tiago looked confusedly from his mother to the stranger, realizing that something important was happening, but not quite understanding what. "Mommy, who is he?" Beatrice swallowed hard, kneeling to be at her son's height. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the boy's shoulders. "Tiago, this is your father." The silence that followed was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Everyone present seemed to hold their breath, involuntary witnesses to a moment that belonged only to that small, long-separated family. Tiago's eyes widened, looking at Rodrigo with a new intensity. "My dad? But you said he had—" "I know what I said," Beatrice interrupted softly, "and I apologize for it. I thought it was better that way." Rodrigo took a step forward, hesitant, his eyes fixed on the boy who was the perfect image of himself as a child. The same eyes, the same face shape, even the small mole on his left cheek. "My son—" It was Joaquin who noticed first. While everyone watched the emotional reunion, his eyes caught a detail. A metallic glint around Tiago's neck, partially visible through his muddy shirt. "The medallion!" he exclaimed, pointing. "Mr. Rodrigo, look at the medallion." Rodrigo shifted his gaze to where Joaquin was pointing. There, hanging around Tiago's neck, was half a golden medallion, identical to the one he himself carried. With trembling hands, Rodrigo took off his own chain, showing the half he had kept for all those years. Beatrice gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. "You kept it, always," Rodrigo replied. "It was my only connection to you." Tiago, slowly understanding what was happening, took off his own chain. With the instinctive wisdom of children, he brought his half close to the half Rodrigo was holding. The two parts fit together perfectly, forming a complete circle where the inscription could be read, "Forever united even when separated. I remember this," Tiago said, his small voice filled with emotion. "You gave it to me on my 5th birthday." Rodrigo couldn't hold back the tears. He fell to his knees, completely ignoring the pain in his injured leg, and opened his arms. After a moment of hesitation, Tiago ran to him, falling into the embrace they had both longed for so long, even without knowing it. Irasema, discreetly, began to disperse the men from the village, thanking them for their help in the rescue, but ensuring they now needed privacy. Sebastian nodded understandingly, and soon the cabin was again occupied only by Joaquin, Irasema, and the newly reunited family. Beatrice remained where she was, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched father and son embrace. There was so much to say, so many explanations to give, so much lost time to regret. "Why, Beatrice?" Rodrigo finally asked, still holding Tiago as if he feared he might disappear at any moment. "Why did you disappear with him? Why did you let me believe that you were—" The word got stuck in his throat. Not even now could he articulate the fear that had tormented him for years. Beatrice sat down slowly on a rustic chair, suddenly looking exhausted, not just from the recent drama of the rescue, but from the weight of 5 years of secrets. "After the accident, when I woke up in the hospital and learned you were in a coma, something broke inside me, Rodrigo. Years of neglect, of broken promises, of misplaced priorities. The doctor said you might never wake up. I couldn't. I didn't want Tiago to grow up waiting for a father who might never return. So you just ran away, without even waiting to see if I would recover. It was wrong, I know. Beatrice admitted, lowering her eyes. But at that moment it seemed like the only way out. I took Tiago and came far away, to this place where my grandmother had lived. When no one knew us, I built a new life, told him his father had left us before he was born. And when you knew I had survived, that I was desperately looking for you. Beatrice closed her eyes, shame evident in her expression. I knew, yes. An old friend found me by chance, told me about you, about the search. But the fear was greater, Rodrigo. Fear that nothing had truly changed, that you would go back to being the same work-obsessed, absent man. And then, as time went on, it became harder and harder to go back, to explain to Tiago Cruz why I had lied. Joaquin, who observed everything with keen eyes, approached the fire, adding another piece of wood. The flames danced higher, illuminating the small family gathering. The fire never lies, he said, his childish voice carrying a wisdom that went beyond his years. It always shows the way back home. Everyone looked at the boy, momentarily distracted from the emotional intensity of the conversation. Did you know this, Joaquin? Irachema asked, intrigued by the boy's observation. Did you know they would reunite? Joaquin shrugged, with the characteristic simplicity of childhood. The fire knew. I just kept it lit. Rodrigo looked at the boy who had saved him, who had saved his son, who somehow mysteriously seemed to have woven the threads of destiny to reunite a shattered family. Thank you, he said simply. Tiago, still in his father's arms, turned to look at Joaquin. With admiration. You saved my life. You would have done the same. Joaquin replied with a small smile. Irachema observed the scene with a thoughtful expression. There was something familiar about Beatrice Khan's face, something that had bothered her since she first saw her, but she couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. Where are you originally from, my Beatrice Elm? She asked suddenly. The young mother seemed surprised by the abrupt change of subject. I was born in Asheville, North Carolina, but my family moved to New York City when I was a teenager. Why? Irachema studied Beatrice County's face more closely, a chill running down her spine. Your mother. What was her name? Beatrice frowned, confused by the interrogation. Cecilia. Cecilia Campos. Color completely drained from Irachema's face. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably, and she had to lean on the table to keep from falling. And your father? Here Anthony Campos is. He passed away when I was 17. Irachema brought her hands to her face, a sob escaping her lips. My God, it's not possible. Beatrice stood up, concerned by the old woman's reaction. Mrs. Irachema, are you all right? Anthony was my husband, Irachema finally said, her voice little more than a whisper. Psychoma Cecilia. Cecilia is my daughter. The revelation struck like lightning in the small cabin. Beatrice recoiled a step as if she had taken a physical blow. What? That can't be true. My grandmother's name was Helena, and Helena was my mother, Irachema interrupted, her voice gaining strength as certainty grew. You must have her name, don't you? Oh, Beatrice Golka, Helena. The shock on Beatrice's face was answer enough. She staggered, seeking support. Rodrigo stood up, still holding Tiago, and steadied her before she fell. But how is this possible? Beatrice stammered. Mom always said her mother had passed away when she was young. I was dead to her in a way, Irachema replied, tears now freely streaming down her wrinkled face. I threw her out of the house when I learned she was pregnant and unmarried. I said terrible, unforgivable things. When I finally realized my mistake, she had already disappeared. Anthony Tews and I searched for years at Grandpa, Beatrice murmured, remembering. He used to visit me secretly sometimes when I was little. Mom would get furious, He never gave up on reconciling you two, Irachema said. Until his last breath, he believed that one day we would find our daughter, meet our grandson or granddaughter. Tiago, looking from one to the other, was the first to verbalize what everyone had just realized. So, you're my great-grandmother. Ojima smiled through her tears, extending a trembling hand towards the boy. Yes, my dear, it seems I am. Joaquin watched everything with wide eyes, fascinated by the way the revelations unfolded. The fire in the fireplace crackled louder, as if applauding the recognition. "I told you," he murmured to the dancing flames. "You always know what you're doing." 3 months had passed since the night of the great storm. Spring had arrived in the Appalachian Mountains, transforming the landscape with wildflowers and skies of an almost unreal blue. Joaquin's small cabin, once a solitary refuge, was now the epicenter of a transformation that spread throughout the entire valley. The land around the cabin had been expanded. New wooden and stone structures emerged, harmoniously integrated with nature. A larger barn, a community garden, a small school. At the center of it all, the original cabin remained intact, with its eternally lit fire. Joaquin, sitting by the stream that cut through the property, observed the movement of people who were now part of his daily life. He still kept his moments of solitude, but the constant presence of Tiago, now his best friend, made everything different. "Joaquin, come see, more materials for the library have arrived," Tiago shouted, running towards him with the characteristic enthusiasm of his 10 years. The boy smiled, getting up to follow his friend. They walked together to the property entrance, where a truck was unloading boxes of books, school supplies, and equipment. Rodrigo supervised the delivery, making notes on a clipboard. Seeing the boys, he broke into a wide smile. "There you are. Come help unload. There's a lot of good stuff here." In the 3 months since reuniting with his family, Rodrigo had undergone a profound transformation. The workaholic executive had given way to a man of renewed purpose. His hair was longer, his stubble gave him a less formal air, and his designer clothes had been replaced by more practical and comfortable attire. After being discharged from the small Pine Ridge Village Art Hospital, where his injured leg had been properly treated, Rodrigo could have returned to New York City, to his company and his former life. But something fundamental had changed within him. "I'll never leave you again," he had told to Beatrice, and to Tiago on the first night they spent together as a family. "If you accept me back, I promise that every day will be proof that I've learned my lesson," and he had kept his word. He settled in a small house in the village with Beatrice and Tiago, making the daily trip to Joaquin's cabin. Via video conference, he reorganized his company, delegating day-to-day operations to trusted executives so he could dedicate himself to the project that now consumed his heart. "The Flame of Hope Institute is officially registered," he announced that morning, showing the documents to the boys as they unloaded the books. "From now on, we are a non-profit organization with all legal rights." The institute was born from a conversation between Rodrigo and Joaquin a few weeks after the dramatic rescue. The businessman, deeply touched by the boy's wisdom and generosity, proposed transforming the isolated cabin into a welcoming center for vulnerable children and families. "The fire you keep lit saved my life, saved my son and gave me back my family," Rodrigo had said. "Imagine how many other people it can help." Joaquin accepted the idea with the same serenity with which he embraced everything in his life. For him, it was just the natural continuation of what his mother had taught him, to keep the flame alive to guide those who needed light. Inside the cabin, now transformed into the symbolic heart of the institute, Beatrice and Iracema Kilsa prepared lunch for the workers. The relationship between daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, or more precisely, between granddaughter and grandmother, had initially been tense, laden with the weight of decades of separation and inherited resentments. "My mother spoke so little of you," Beatrice had confessed in the early days, and when she did, it was with so much bitterness. "I deserved every word of resentment," Iracema had replied with the humility that only years could teach. "I was proud, inflexible, unable to accept that my daughter had the right to live her own life, make her own mistakes." Day after day, between shared recipes and recovered family stories, the two built a bridge over the abyss that had separated them for so long. Iracema, who had initially planned to stay only until the end of the storm, had now settled permanently in the village, dedicating herself to getting to know the granddaughter she never knew she had and the great-grandson who was the continuation of her beloved Anthony St. Azar's legacy. "He always said that family is like fire," she once commented, as she watched Joaquin feed the flames in the fireplace. It needs to be cared for daily so it doesn't go out. The afternoon advanced as work continued. In the new building that would serve as a rural school, Sebastian, the same man who had led the rescue during the storm, installed the windows with the help of other villagers. I never thought I'd see something like this around here, he commented to Rodrigo, who had come to inspect the progress. This region has always been so forgotten by public authorities. That's precisely why we need to do our part, the businessman replied. We can't wait for others to solve problems that we can help solve. The Institute's philosophy was simple: create a space where vulnerable people could find not only material aid, but also spiritual and emotional comfort. A place where the fire, literal and metaphorical, would never go out. At dusk, as was already tradition, everyone gathered around the outdoor bonfire for the community meal. Villagers, institute workers, occasional visitors, all were welcome to share stories and food. Joaquin, as always, was responsible for lighting the main fire. There was an almost sacred reverence in this daily ritual, a moment when everyone fell silent to watch the boy perform his task with the same concentration as an ancient priest. My mother used to say that every flame has a story to tell, he once explained to Tiago, who watched him fascinated. You just have to know how to listen. On that particular night, the group gathered was larger than usual. A family displaced by a severe drought had arrived earlier, referred by the local parish priest. They were exhausted, malnourished, with eyes that mixed distrust and hope, the same look as Rodrigo had carried on the stormy night he arrived at the cabin. Welcome, Joaquin said, approaching them with the naturalness of someone receiving old friends. The fire is lit for you. The simplicity of the welcome, without bureaucracy or questioning, was a fundamental part of the Institute's philosophy. First warmth, then food, then rest. Only then would come the questions and referrals. During dinner, served at rustic tables arranged around the bonfire, Rodrigo observed the movement with quiet satisfaction. From an executive focused exclusively on results and profits, he had transformed into a man who measured success by the sparkle in the eyes of the people he helped. What are you thinking about? Beatrice, Owen asked, sitting beside him with a plate of food. How life comes full circle, he replied, taking her hand. 4 months ago, I was in a boardroom discussing the acquisition of a competitor company. If someone told me I'd be here today, would you believe it? Rodrigo smiled, looking at his son who was playing with Joaquin near the fire. Probably not. But you know what? I've never been happier. Across the bonfire, Iracema was talking with the mother of the newly arrived family. There was in her gestures the understanding of someone who had also known despair and the feeling of having nowhere to go. You can stay as long as you need, she said. Here no one is judged by the past, only by the sincere desire to rebuild the future. As the night advanced and the full moon rose in the sky, the atmosphere around the bonfire became more intimate. Someone took out an acoustic guitar, another an accordion, and soon music filled the mountain air. Joaquin sat a little apart, observing the scene with a contemplative gaze that did not match his young age. Rodrigo, noticing his isolation, approached him. Everything all right, champ? The boy nodded without taking his eyes off the bonfire. I was just thinking about my mom. She would like to see this. Rodrigo sat beside him, respecting the moment of reflection. I'm sure she would, and I'm sure she sees in some way. Joaquin smiled, a serene smile that illuminated his childlike face. She used to say that as long as the fire is lit, no one truly leaves. They stay here, he pointed to his own chest, and here, pointing to the bonfire. The two remained silent for a few minutes, immersed in their own thoughts. It was Joaquin who finally broke the silence. Mr. Tone, Rodrigo, do you think I can stay here forever? Even when the Institute gets big? The question caught Rodrigo by surprise. They had never formally discussed the boy's future. After the storm and all the revelations that followed, Child Protective Services had been involved, of course. But thanks to Rodrigo's intervention and his influence, they managed to establish a temporary arrangement that allowed Joaquin to continue in the cabin, under the joint supervision of Iracema and the businessman himself. Joaquin, this place exists because of you. Rodrigo finally replied, It's your home, your legacy. No one will ever take that from you. The boy considered the answer for a moment. But the lady from Child Protective Services said I need a family. Responsible adults. And don't you think you have that now? A spark of understanding appeared in the boy's eyes. You mean, you all? Rodrigo smiled, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Beatrice. Tiago. Mrs. Irashima and I have been talking about it. If you want, we would like to formalize what is already real in practice. You are part of our family, Joaquin. The boy's eyes filled with tears. Not of sadness, but of a joy so intense it almost hurt. I would really like that. Rodrigo opened his arms and Joaquin plunged into the embrace without hesitation. For so long alone, the boy finally found the belonging that all human beings seek. There's only one condition, he said, still in bay. Rodrigo's arms. What is it? The fire needs to stay lit, always. Rodrigo laughed, hugging him tighter. That I can guarantee. In fact, it's the heart of everything we're building here. 3 weeks later, a small ceremony was held in the Institute's newly built chapel. It wasn't a formal religious event, but a community celebration that blended spiritual elements from various traditions, just as the Institute itself did. At the center of the makeshift altar, a flame burned in a specially designed vessel, a replica of the original fireplace in Joaquin's cabin, now transformed into a permanent symbol of the Flame of Hope Institute. Rodrigo, simply but dignifiedly dressed, conducted the ceremony. Beside him were Beatrice, Tiago, Irachema, and of course Joaquin Sinas, all formally united not only by blood ties, but by the conscious choice to form a family. This place is born from the conviction that no one should face darkness alone. Rodrigo addressed the small gathered crowd, that every human being deserves not only physical shelter, but also the warmth of true welcome, of non-judgmental listening, of a real chance to start anew. His eyes swept over the attentive faces, villagers, local authorities, institute collaborators, and the first families welcomed by the project. The name Flame of Hope was not chosen by chance. It honors the wisdom of a boy who, even in the deepest solitude, kept alive the flame that would eventually illuminate the path of so many others. All eyes turned to Joaquin, who blushed slightly with the attention. His face, however, radiated a tranquil happiness, the expression of someone who had finally found his purpose. From today on, this institute commits to being a beacon for those who are lost, a temporary home for those who have nowhere to go, and a starting point for those who wish to rebuild their lives. At the end of the ceremony, a new tradition was established. Each person present lit a small candle from the central flame, symbolizing how light could multiply without ever diminishing its original source. Take this flame to your homes, to your hearts, Rodrigo's instructed. And remember, as long as there is a single flame lit, the darkness will never be complete. At night, when the festivities ended and most visitors returned to their homes, the newly formalized family gathered in the original cabin. The fire crackled in the fireplace as it always had. Sitting in a circle around the flames, each immersed in their own thoughts, they shared a comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only exists between people who no longer need to fill voids with words. It was Tiago who finally spoke, his childlike voice carrying the innocence that made his observations so powerful. I think the fire is happy today. Joaquin smiled, watching the flames dance. It's always happy when we fulfill our purpose. Ratima, sitting in a rocking chair that Sebastian had specially built for her, sighed contentedly. Who would have thought that at 65 I would find a new reason to live, a family, a purpose? It's never too late to start over, Beatrice said, holding her grandmother's hand. That's what I've learned in the last few months. Rodrigo observed the scene with a heart overflowing with gratitude. The man who had lost everything for not knowing what truly mattered now found himself richer than he had ever imagined possible. Not in material possessions, but in genuine human connections. You know, he said, I think I'll need to write a new business plan for my life. Everyone looked at him curious. What kind of plan? Beatrice Abon asked, smiling. One whose main objective is never to forget what truly matters. One that measures success in smiles, not in figures. One that puts people ahead of projects. Joaquin stood up to add another piece of wood to the fire, performing the ritual with the same reverence as always. My mother used to say that the most important plan is simple: keep the flame lit and the door open. The rest happens naturally. The flames grew, illuminating the faces united by destiny, or was it by fire, in that cabin that had begun as a solitary refuge and now transformed into the heart of something much larger. Outside, a new knock on the door announced someone else needing shelter. Joaquin, with the lantern in his hands, stood up to answer, as he had done on that stormy night that forever changed the course of so many lives. Before opening, he turned to his new family with a small smile of wisdom. If someone knocks, it's because they still believe they can be saved. And so in the Appalachian Mountains, where time seemed to flow at its own pace and the stars shone with crystal clarity, the story continued, because true light never goes out, it just finds new ways to illuminate the darkness. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Joaquin, Rodrigo, Beatriz, Tiago, and Iracemas has warmed your hearts as much as the flame that never went out in that cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other American stories that celebrate the power of hope and new beginnings. Find it by clicking here. If this narrative touched your soul, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Your support is the flame that keeps our work alive. Every day we bring original stories that explore the cultural richness of our country and the depth of human feelings. Share in the comments which moment of this journey moved you the most. Was it the rescue in the storm? The family reunion? Or perhaps the simple wisdom of a boy who always kept the fire lit? We look forward to hearing your impressions and suggestions for future stories. Until our next encounter, keep your own flame of hope burning.